The thunder of hooves pounding across the open prairie echoed in Zara Mitchell's ears as she raced her Palomino mare against the darkening sky, her heart beating as wildly as the approaching storm. The cattle were scattering, driven mad by the lightning that cracked open the heavens above the Wyoming Territory of 1876, and with each flash, she could see her father's prized herd, their livelihood, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Rain lashed against Zara's face as she pulled her sodden hat lower, squinting through the downpour. Her father had fallen ill 3 days prior, leaving the 20-year-old to manage the spring roundup alone. The neighboring ranchers had promised help, but none had arrived before the unexpected storm hit with a fury that seemed determined to destroy everything the Mitchell family had built since moving west 5 years ago. "Hiya!" she shouted, voice nearly lost in the wind as she tried to turn the lead steer. But nature proved stronger than human will. A blinding flash, followed instantly by a deafening crack of thunder, spooked her mare. Zara clung desperately to the saddle horn as the horse reared, nearly throwing her before bolting sideways. By the time she regained control, the cattle had vanished into the night, their frightened bellows fading into the howling storm. Zara sat drenched and defeated, watching helplessly as months of work and their entire future disappeared before her eyes. "Pa is going to die when he finds out," she whispered, the bitter irony of her words not lost on her as she thought of her father's weakened condition back at the ranch house. Without the herd, they couldn't make the payment on their loan. Without the payment, they would lose everything. The rain continued through the night. Zara finally returned to the modest ranch house shortly before dawn, her clothes soaked through, her spirit broken. She tied her exhausted horse under the lean-to beside the barn and trudged toward the house, dreading having to tell her father that their 50 head of cattle, the breeding stock they'd worked so hard to establish, were gone. She pushed open the door to find Martha, the widow from the neighboring homestead who had been caring for her father, dozing in the rocking chair beside his bed. "Zara," Martha startled awake. "Thank the Lord you're safe. I was worried sick when that storm hit." Zara hung her dripping hat on the peg by the door. "The herd's gone," she said, her voice hollow. "Scattered to the four winds." Martha's weathered face fell. "Oh, child." Zara moved to her father's bedside. Despite the fever that had kept him bedridden for days, Thomas Mitchell's eyes fluttered open at her approach. Once a robust man whose laugh could fill a room, the pneumonia had reduced him to a shadow. His breathing labored, his once ruddy face now ashen. "Zara," he whispered, reaching for her hand. "The cattle," she couldn't lie to him. "The storm scattered them, Pa. I tried to turn them, but—" Her voice caught. The disappointment in her father's eyes was brief but unmistakable before he masked it with a weak smile. "Not your fault, girl. Nature has its way. I'll find them," Zara promised, though she had no idea how. "I'll bring them back." Her father squeezed her hand with what little strength remained in his grip. "Rest first. You can't help anyone if you fall ill too." Reluctantly, Zara let Martha lead her away from her father's bedside. The older woman handed her a towel and some dry clothes. "Change and eat something," Martha instructed. "I made stew. I'm not hungry. Doesn't matter. You need strength." Martha's tone brooked no argument. While Zara changed and forced down a bowl of beef stew, Martha told her that Doc Wilson had visited yesterday and left more medicine for her father. "He said the fever should break soon," Martha said, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. Zara nodded absently, her mind already racing ahead to the problem of the missing cattle. They represented everything, the culmination of her father's dream after losing their farm in Missouri, the promise of a new beginning after her mother's death. They couldn't lose them now. "I'll head out at first light tomorrow," Zara decided. "I'll find whatever's left of the herd." "You can't go alone," Martha protested. "It's too dangerous." "What choice do I have? Pa can't ride and we can't afford to hire help." Martha pressed her lips together in a thin line. "Let me ask around. Perhaps someone from town can assist." Zara laughed bitterly. "We've been asking for help for 3 days, Martha. No one came." Sleep claimed Zara shortly after, her exhausted body surrendering despite her troubled mind. She dreamed of stampeding cattle and endless rain, waking with a start when someone knocked forcefully on the front door. The sun had already risen. Zara rubbed her eyes, disoriented to find she'd slept well into the morning. Martha was nowhere to be seen, and her father still slept fitfully in his bed. The knocking came again, more insistent. Zara smoothed her rumpled clothes and opened the door to find a tall figure silhouetted against the morning light. Miss Mitchell. The man removed his hat, revealing tousled dark hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. Name's Owen Armstrong. Heard you lost your herd in the storm last night. Zara straightened her spine, instantly defensive. News travels fast. Small territories have big ears. His expression remained serious, but there was a warmth in his eyes that didn't match his stern mouth. Martha Holloway found me in town this morning, said you might need some help. Zara studied him. Owen Armstrong stood well over 6 feet, his frame lean but solid beneath a worn leather vest and faded blue shirt. His face was tanned from long hours in the sun, a small scar cutting through his right eyebrow. She guessed him to be around 25, though the weathering that came from a life outdoors made it hard to tell for certain. "Are you from around here?" she asked cautiously. "I don't recall seeing you before. Been working cattle drives between Wyoming and Colorado for the past few years." He shifted his weight, comfortable in the silence that followed. "I know cattle, Miss Mitchell, and I know this territory." "I can't pay you," Zara said bluntly. "Not until we sell the herd if we ever find them." Owen nodded. "Martha explained your situation. I'm not asking for payment." Zara's eyes narrowed. "Nobody works for free, Mr. Armstrong." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I've got my reasons. Let's just say I owe a debt to someone who would want me to help you." Before Zara could press him further, Martha appeared behind Owen, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. "I see you two have met," she said, bustling past them into the house. "I've brought fresh bread and preserves, and Owen here has agreed to help find your cattle." Owen replaced his hat. "If you'll have me." Zara hesitated. Pride told her to refuse, to handle this herself as she had handled everything else since her mother died. But practicality won out. She knew the odds of recovering the scattered herd alone were slim to none. "When can you start?" she asked. "Already have." He gestured toward the corral where 2 horses stood saddled and ready. "I tracked some hoofprints heading northeast this morning. Found 3 of your steers about 2 miles out. Got them penned in your south pasture." Hope flickered to life in Zara's chest for the first time since the storm hit. 3 down, 47 to go. Owen's expression remained serious. "We should head out soon if we want to cover ground before dark. The storm drove them far, but cattle tend to follow the path of least resistance. They'll be in the lowlands, following the creek beds." Martha spoke up. "I'll stay with your father, Zara. Doc Wilson is coming by again this afternoon." Zara glanced back at her father's still form on the bed, torn between her duty to him and the necessity of finding their livelihood. "He'd want you to go," Martha said softly. "You know that." With a reluctant nod, Zara gathered what she needed: her father's old Winchester rifle, some jerky, and a canteen of water. Within minutes, she joined Owen at the corral. He handed her the reins to her palomino, already saddled. "She looks fresh enough. Must be tough as nails to have weathered that storm with you." "Penny's the best horse I've ever ridden," Zara said, patting the mare's neck affectionately. They rode out as the morning mist was burning off the hills. Owen led the way, his eyes constantly scanning the ground, following signs Zara could barely discern. He had the quiet competence of a man who had spent his life outdoors, reading the land as easily as others might read a book. "Your cattle have Mitchell Ranch brands, correct?" he asked as they forded a shallow stream. "M-Bar-T," Zara confirmed. "My father's initials." Owen nodded. "Makes them easier to identify, though in these parts not many would mistake them for another ranch's stock. The Hendersons run sheep to the north, and the Carter place to the south hasn't had cattle in 2 years. You know a lot about the area for someone who's been away on cattle drives." His expression revealed nothing. "I make it my business to know the territory where I work." They rode in silence for a while, following a set of tracks that led toward a wooded draw. The day grew warmer, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and new grass. "There," Owen pointed suddenly. Through the trees, Zara could make out the distinctive red-brown hide of a steer. "That's one of ours," she exclaimed. Owen raised a hand, signaling her to approach slowly. Easy now, they'll be skittish after the storm. With practiced efficiency, he guided his horse around the small group of cattle 5 steers that had somehow stayed together during the chaos of the night. Zara followed his lead, helping to urge them back toward the direction of the ranch. That's 8, she said, hope rising in her voice. Maybe this won't be as impossible as I thought. Owen's expression remained measured. Don't get too optimistic yet. These were the easy ones close to home. The rest could be scattered across miles. By midday, they had located and begun herding 15 head of cattle. The animals were clearly exhausted from their frightened flight during the storm, making them somewhat easier to manage than they might have been otherwise. As they paused to rest the horses and eat some of Martha's bread, Zara studied Owen surreptitiously. He sat with his back against a tree, hat pulled low over his eyes, but she could tell he wasn't resting. His posture remained alert, his head occasionally turning at distant sounds she couldn't hear. "Why are you really helping us?" she asked finally. "And don't give me that line about owing someone a debt. Martha barely knows you." Owen lifted his hat, meeting her gaze directly. "Your father helped me once years ago. He probably wouldn't even remember it." Zara's curiosity was piqued. "What did he do?" "I was 16, passing through with a cattle drive. Got thrown from my horse and knocked unconscious about a mile from your property. Your father found me, brought me to your ranch, and had your mother tend to my injuries. Let me stay until I was well enough to catch up with my outfit." Zara searched her memory. "I don't recall that. You were likely away. Your father mentioned you were visiting relatives back east that summer." Owen took a drink from his canteen. It was just a simple kindness on his part, but not everyone would have bothered with a skinny kid they didn't know. The story rang true. It was exactly the sort of thing Thomas Mitchell would have done, and Zara had indeed spent a summer with her aunt in St. Louis when she was 15. "So you're repaying a debt from years ago by tracking down our entire herd." She remained skeptical. Owen shrugged. "A man honors his debts no matter how long it takes." He stood, brushing crumbs from his clothes. "We should keep moving. There's a lot of ground to cover before dark." They rode hard through the afternoon, finding scattered groups of 2 or 3 cattle at a time. Each recovery bolstered Zara's spirits, though she tried to temper her hope with realism. By sunset, they had located 27 head, just over half the herd. "We should head back," Owen said as the light began to fade. "These cattle need water and rest, and so do the horses." Zara knew he was right, but the thought of returning with barely half their herd recovered gnawed at her. What if we lose the trail of the others by morning? "The tracks aren't going anywhere," Owen assured her. "And I have a feeling the rest may have headed toward the North Fork. There's good water and shelter there. We can check at first light." The ride back was slow with the small herd in tow. The cattle moved reluctantly, still stressed from their ordeal. Twilight had deepened into full darkness by the time they approached the Mitchell ranch, the windows of the house glowing with lamplight. Martha came out onto the porch as they guided the cattle into the corral. "Thank the Lord," she called. "Your father's been worried sick." "How is he?" Zara dismounted quickly, wincing at the stiffness in her legs after the long day's ride. "The fever broke this afternoon," Martha reported, her face breaking into a relieved smile. "Doc Wilson says he's turned the corner, though he's still weak as a kitten." Relief flooded through Zara. "That's the best news I've heard all day." Owen finished securing the corral gate. 27 head accounted for, he reported. "We'll go after the rest tomorrow." Martha insisted they both come inside and eat before Owen rode back to town. "I've got a pot of stew that's been simmering all day, and you two look dead on your feet." The small house felt warmer than Zara remembered, her father's improved condition lifting a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Thomas Mitchell was awake, propped up on pillows, his face still pale but his eyes clear for the first time in days. "Pa," Zara rushed to his bedside, taking his hand. "How are you feeling?" "Better," he said, his voice thin but steady. "Martha tells me you found some of our herd." "More than half," Zara confirmed, "and we'll find the rest tomorrow." Her father's gaze shifted past her to where Owen stood respectfully by the door. A flicker of recognition crossed the older man's face. "Armstrong, isn't it?" Owen stepped forward, surprise evident in his expression. "Yes, sir. Didn't think you'd remember me." A weak smile touched Thomas Mitchell's lips. Hard to forget a boy who could eat his weight in my wife's biscuits. He extended a trembling hand. Thank you for helping my daughter. Owen shook his hand carefully. Just returning a kindness, Mr. Mitchell. They ate Martha's stew at the small table, the conversation revolving around where the remaining cattle might have scattered and the best strategy for finding them. Owen believed the majority would have followed the path of least resistance during the storm, which would have taken them northeast toward the more sheltered valleys. If we're lucky, they'll have bunched together again once the storm passed, he explained. Cattle don't like being alone. As the meal concluded, Zara walked Owen to the door. The night had grown cool, stars blanketing the clear sky that gave no hint of the previous night's fury. Thank you, she said quietly. I couldn't have found so many without your help. Owen settled his hat on his head. We're not done yet. I'll be back at dawn. True to his word, Owen arrived as the first light of morning crept over the eastern hills. Zara was already up, having checked on her father and the recovered cattle. Thomas was sleeping peacefully, his breathing easier than it had been in days. They rode out as the sun cleared the horizon, heading northeast as Owen had suggested. The day promised to be warm, the storm's moisture already beginning to steam from the ground as the temperature rose. Your father seems to be recovering well, Owen commented as they rode. Yes, thanks to Martha and Doc Wilson. Zara adjusted her hat against the brightening sun. It's been a hard year for him. After my mother passed last fall, he threw himself into building up the herd. I think it was his way of keeping grief at bay. Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. Work can be a comfort when words fail. Did you lose someone? The question slipped out before Zara could consider its propriety. If he was offended by her directness, he didn't show it. My parents, when I was 12, influenza took them both within a week of each other. I'm sorry. The simple words seemed inadequate for such a loss. It was a long time ago. His tone made it clear the subject was closed. They rode in comfortable silence for the next hour, following the increasingly obvious trail of the scattered herd. The cattle had indeed moved northeast, and as they crested a ridge overlooking a small valley, Zara gasped. Below them, grazing peacefully along the banks of a narrow stream, were at least a dozen head of cattle bearing the M-Bar-T brand. You were right, she breathed, a smile breaking across her face. Owen's own expression remained cautious. Let's approach slowly. We don't want to spook them. With practiced skill, they maneuvered their horses to encircle the cattle, gradually tightening the perimeter until the animals began to move in the direction they wanted. Unlike the previous day's recoveries, these cattle seemed calm, as if the night's rest and plentiful water and grass had eased their storm-induced panic. They looked to be in good shape, Owen noted as they began the drive back toward the ranch. No obvious injuries that I can see. Zara counted them as they moved. 15 here. With yesterday's 27, that's 42. Hope surged within her. We're only missing 8 head. Let's get these back to the ranch, Owen suggested. Then we can make a wider sweep to the north before dark. The drive back took most of the day, the cattle moving at their own stubborn pace despite Owen and Zara's efforts to hurry them along. By the time they reached the Mitchell Ranch, the sun was already beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Martha met them at the corral, her face alight with good news. 2 more of your strays wandered home on their own about an hour ago. Your father spotted them from the window. That's 44, Zara calculated quickly. Just 6 more to find. Owen helped her secure the newly recovered cattle in the corral, ensuring they had access to water after their journey. Despite the urgency to find the remaining animals, he insisted on checking each one for injuries. No point in saving them only to lose them to infection or lameness later, he pointed out as he examined a young heifer's leg where a cut had begun to fester. With gentle efficiency, he cleaned and treated the wound while Zara held the animal steady. Martha brought them both coffee as they worked. Your father's been up and about a bit today, she told Zara. Not for long, mind you, but it's a good sign. After ensuring all the cattle were tended to, Owen turned to Zara. We've got maybe 3 hours of daylight left. If we ride hard, we might be able to locate the rest before dark. Zara nodded, already moving toward where their horses were tied. Let's go. This time they rode north, following Owen's hunch that the remaining cattle might have been driven farther by the storm's fury. The terrain grew rougher, with rocky outcroppings and patches of dense brush that made tracking more difficult. Just as Zara was beginning to lose hope, Owen raised a hand, signaling her to stop. He dismounted, examining something on the ground that Zara couldn't discern from horseback. Tracks, he confirmed. Recent 2, 3, maybe 4 head. They followed the trail carefully, the setting sun casting long shadows that made visibility challenging. As they rounded a bend in a narrow ravine, they came upon 4 steers huddled in a small clearing, one of them limping noticeably. That's Hercules, Zara identified the largest steer, relief evident in her voice. Pa raised him from a calf. He's the cornerstone of our breeding stock. Owen assessed the situation quickly. The big one looks fine, but the yearling there is favoring his right foreleg. We'll need to take it slow getting them back. With care and patience, they managed to get the cattle moving toward home. The injured yearling slowed their progress considerably, but Zara refused to leave it behind. We can't do better than 48, she acknowledged as darkness began to fall in earnest. 2 must have been lost in the storm. Owen surprised her by shaking his head. I'm not giving up yet. Cattle are tougher than most people give them credit for. They made it back to the ranch well after dark, guided by the light of a nearly full moon. Martha had kept a lamp burning in the window, and Thomas Mitchell himself stood leaning in the doorway, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders despite the mild night. You should be resting, Pa, Zara admonished as they approached the house, having secured the newly recovered cattle. Couldn't sleep knowing you 2 were still out there. Thomas's voice was stronger than the day before, though he still moved with obvious weakness. How many did you find? 48 in total, Zara reported. We're just missing 2. Thomas nodded, satisfaction evident despite the loss. That's more than I dared hope for after that storm hit. You've done well, both of you. Owen removed his hat. We'll look for the last 2 tomorrow, Mr. Mitchell. No sense giving up when we've come this far. Thomas studied the younger man thoughtfully. You're welcome to stay the night, Armstrong. That old bunkhouse isn't much, but it's dry and has a decent cot. Owen hesitated, but the practicality of the offer was undeniable. It was a long ride back to town, and he would only have to return at dawn. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Martha had kept food warm for them, and they ate quickly, fatigue from the long day settling into their bones. After the meal, Owen excused himself to check on the horses before turning in, leaving Zara alone with her father. He's a good man, Thomas observed once Owen was out of earshot. Not many would work this hard for strangers. We're not exactly strangers, Zara reminded him. You helped him years ago, Thomas smiled faintly. A small kindness repaid 100-fold. He patted her hand. Keep an eye on that one, Zara. Men like that are rare in these parts. Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. Pa, it's not like that. He's just helping us recover the herd. Her father's knowing look spoke volumes, but he said nothing more on the subject. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Zara woke early, but Owen was already up, tending to the horses and checking on the recovered cattle. I think we should try Southwest today, he suggested over a breakfast of eggs and leftover biscuits. There's a stand of cottonwoods about 5 miles out that would provide good shelter during a storm. Thomas, looking stronger by the hour, nodded in agreement. Those last 2 might be our young bulls. They tend to stick together, and they're more adventurous than the rest. With renewed determination, Zara and Owen set out once more. The day grew hot quickly, the recent storm's moisture creating a humid atmosphere unusual for Wyoming in early summer. They rode for hours, checking every ravine and thicket that might harbor stray cattle. By midday, Zara's spirits had begun to flag. Maybe we should accept that we've lost 2, she suggested as they stopped to water the horses at a small spring. 48 out of 50 is better than I ever expected. Owen splashed water on his face, washing away the dust of their search. You don't strike me as someone who gives up easily, Miss Mitchell. Zara, she corrected him. After 2 days of riding side by side, formality seemed unnecessary. And I'm not giving up, I'm being realistic. Owen's eyes met hers, a challenge in their gray depths. One more ridge, If we don't find sign of them by then, we'll head back. That one ridge became 2 and then 3 as they pushed farther southwest than they had initially planned. The terrain grew rougher, with rocky outcroppings and steep drops that would be treacherous for cattle and horses alike. This was a mistake, Zara admitted as they navigated a particularly difficult passage. They wouldn't have come this far. Owen reined in his horse suddenly, head cocked as if listening. "Do you hear that?" Zara strained to hear whatever had caught his attention. After a moment, she recognized the distinctive lowing of cattle, distant but unmistakable. "It's coming from over there." Owen pointed toward a narrow canyon to their right. They approached cautiously, aware that the sound could be coming from another ranch's stock. As they rounded a bend in the canyon, Zara's heart leaped. There, trapped on a small plateau halfway up the canyon wall, were 2 young bulls bearing the M-Bar-T brand. "That's them," she exclaimed. "But how in the world did they get up there?" Owen studied the situation critically. "Probably scrambled up during the storm and got stuck. There's a path up, see there, but it looks like part of it might have given way behind them." The bulls had spotted them and were pacing nervously in their elevated prison, clearly distressed but unable to find a way down. "How do we get them down safely?" Zara asked, eyeing the steep, crumbling path with concern. Owen dismounted, handing her his reins. "I'll go up and see if I can guide them down. You stay here with the horses." "That's too dangerous," Zara protested. "If the path gave way once, it could again. Do you have a better idea?" His expression was patient but determined. Zara bit her lip, knowing he was right. "Be careful. Those bulls are young and strong, but they're probably terrified by now." Owen nodded, checking that his lariat was secured to his belt before beginning the treacherous climb. Zara watched anxiously as he picked his way up the canyon wall, testing each foothold before committing his weight to it. When he reached the bulls, he moved slowly, speaking in a low, calming voice that Zara couldn't quite make out from below. The animals were clearly agitated, but something in Owen's manner seemed to soothe them. After what seemed like an eternity, Owen managed to get a rope around the neck of one bull, using it to guide rather than pull the animal. With infinite patience, he led it to what appeared to be the safest path down the canyon wall. The descent was heart-stopping. Several times, loose rock gave way beneath the bull's hooves, sending small avalanches of debris down the steep slope. Each time, Owen adjusted, finding a new route, never rushing despite the obvious danger. When the first bull finally reached the canyon floor, Zara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The animal was trembling but appeared unharmed. Owen didn't rest. He immediately began the climb again to retrieve the second bull. This one proved more difficult, repeatedly backing away from the edge. Zara could see Owen's patience being tested, but he never resorted to force or anger. Finally, using his lariat as both guide and safety line, Owen managed to coax the second bull down the treacherous path. By the time both animals were safely on level ground, the sun was beginning to set. Owen was covered in dust and sweat, a small cut on his forearm where he'd scraped against the rock, but his expression was one of pure satisfaction. 50 out of 50, he said simply. Zara impulsively threw her arms around him, overcome with gratitude and admiration. "That was the bravest, most foolhardy thing I've ever seen anyone do for a couple of ornery bulls." Owen stiffened momentarily in surprise before his arms came around her, returning the embrace briefly before he stepped back. "They're fine animals, worth saving." The journey home took longer than expected. The young bulls were exhausted and dehydrated, requiring frequent stops. Night had fully fallen by the time they approached the Mitchell ranch, but lanterns burned in every window, as if the house itself was keeping vigil for their return. Thomas and Martha came out onto the porch as they approached, the older man standing straighter than he had in days. "You found them," Thomas called, disbelief and joy mingling in his voice as he recognized his prized young bulls. "Owen found them," Zara corrected, dismounting stiffly. Trapped on a ledge in Carson Canyon, he climbed up and led them down himself. Thomas's eyes widened. "That canyon's a death trap in places." Owen shrugged modestly as he secured the bulls in the corral with the rest of the recovered herd. They just needed a little encouragement. That night, Martha outdid herself preparing a celebratory meal. Thomas insisted that Owen join them at the family table, and the conversation flowed easily. Tales of cattle drives and ranching mishaps punctuated by laughter that seemed to chase away the lingering shadows of the recent crisis. As the evening wound down, Thomas pulled out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. To 50 out of 50, he toasted, his eyes bright with more than just the liquor. And to the man who made it possible. Owen accepted the toast with a slight inclination of his head, but Zara noticed his discomfort at being the center of attention. For all his capability in a crisis, he was a man who preferred to remain in the background. Later, as Martha and Thomas retired for the night, Zara walked Owen to the door. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. "Will you be leaving now?" she asked, surprising herself with how much she dreaded his answer. Owen hesitated. "I should check on those young bulls one more time tomorrow. The one that cut his leg on the rocks might need tending." Relief flooded through Zara. "Then you'll stay another night, if that's acceptable. More than acceptable." The words came out more fervently than she'd intended, and she quickly added, "Pa would be disappointed if you left without a proper thank you." Owen's eyes, silvered by the moonlight, studied her face. "Is that the only reason you want me to stay?" The directness of his question caught Zara off guard. In the 3 days they'd spent together, riding from dawn until dusk, sharing meals and the satisfaction of each recovered animal, something had shifted between them. Something neither had acknowledged until this moment. "No," she admitted softly. "That's not the only reason," he nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Good night, Zara. I'll see you in the morning." The next day passed in a blur of activity. The entire herd needed attention after their ordeal, with several animals requiring treatment for minor injuries sustained during the storm and subsequent days in the wild. Owen worked tirelessly alongside Zara, his knowledge of cattle and their ailments proving invaluable. Thomas Mitchell, though still weak, insisted on coming out to the corral to inspect the herd himself. He moved slowly, leaning on a walking stick, but his pride in seeing the recovered animals was evident. "You've saved this ranch," he told Owen as they watched Zara tend to a calf with a cut on its flank. "I don't know how we can ever repay you." Owen shook his head. "No repayment necessary, sir. As I told your daughter, I was simply returning a kindness." Thomas eyed him shrewdly. "Is that the only reason you stayed to help?" The question echoed Zara's from the night before, and Owen found himself giving a similar answer. "No, sir, not the only reason." A knowing smile crossed the older man's face. "Thought as much." He gestured toward where Zara was working. "She's the strongest person I know. Has been since her mother died. Takes on everything herself, never asks for help." "I noticed," Owen said dryly. "She needs someone who understands that strength, not someone who wants to tame it." Thomas's gaze was direct, evaluating. "Are you that someone, Armstrong?" Owen met his gaze steadily. "I believe strength should be respected, not tamed, Mr. Mitchell." The answer seemed to satisfy Thomas, who nodded once before changing the subject to the condition of the herd. That evening, as they finished the chores, Owen finally broached the subject that had been on his mind. "I need to head back to town tomorrow. I've got commitments I can't put off any longer." Disappointment flickered across Zara's face, though she tried to hide it. "Of course. You've already done far more than we had any right to expect." Owen leaned against the corral fence, watching as the setting sun painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I've been thinking about settling down somewhere," he said casually. "Getting tired of the trail drives, moving from place to place." Zara's heart quickened, but she kept her tone neutral. "Oh, any particular place in mind?" "I hear the Henderson place to the north might be for sale. Old man Henderson wants to move back east to be with his daughter." Owen glanced at her sideways. "It's a good piece of land, needs work, but the potential's there." "It's fine land," Zara agreed, hardly daring to hope at what his words implied, "but it's a lot for one man to manage alone." Owen turned to face her fully then, his expression serious. "That's true. A man would need a partner, someone who knows cattle and isn't afraid of hard work." Zara met his gaze, a smile tugging at her lips. "I might know someone who fits that description." "I thought you might." The corners of his eyes crinkled with suppressed amusement. The question is, would this person be interested in such a partnership? That depends, Zara said, taking a step closer to him. Is it strictly a business arrangement you're proposing, Mr. Armstrong? Owen closed the remaining distance between them, his hand gently touching her cheek. Not strictly, no. When he kissed her, it felt as natural as the sunset they stood beneath, inevitable and right. His lips were warm against hers, the contact brief but full of promise. I should speak to your father, Owen said as they drew apart. Zara laughed softly. I think he's already given his approval. The next morning, Owen rode to town as planned, but not before having a lengthy conversation with Thomas Mitchell in the privacy of the ranch house's small study. Zara pretended not to notice the handshake that concluded their discussion, or the way her father's eyes shone with barely concealed satisfaction. He'll be back, Thomas assured her as they watched Owen ride away. Good men always keep their promises. True to her father's prediction, Owen returned 3 days later. He carried with him papers from the land office and news that he'd begun negotiations for the Henderson property. Over the following weeks, as summer settled fully over the Wyoming Territory, a pattern emerged. Owen divided his time between the Mitchell Ranch, where the recovered herd was thriving under his and Zara's care, and the Henderson place, where he worked from dawn until dusk preparing it for new ownership. Thomas Mitchell's health improved steadily, though he would never again be the robust man he once was. He took satisfaction in watching Zara and Owen work together, their partnership seamless whether they were mending fences or driving cattle to new pasture. You two remind me of your mother and me when we first came west, he commented one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the tall grass. She had that same fire in her eyes when she looked at me. Zara blushed but didn't deny it. The feelings that had taken root during those desperate days after the storm had blossomed into something deeper, something she no longer tried to hide. By late August, Owen had completed the purchase of the Henderson Ranch. The property lay just 3 miles north of the Mitchell land, with a creek running between them that could benefit both operations if managed properly. On a warm September afternoon, exactly 6 months from the day of the storm that had nearly destroyed everything, Owen asked Zara to marry him. They stood on a hillside overlooking both properties, the cattle grazing peacefully in the valley below, living proof of what they had accomplished together. I can't promise it will always be easy, he told her, holding her hands in his. Ranch life never is. But I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it side by side. Zara's answer was as straightforward as everything else about her. Yes, she said simply, then laughed at the relief that washed over his face. Did you really think I might say otherwise? Owen pulled her into his arms. I've learned never to take anything for granted where you're concerned, Zara Mitchell. They were married on the first day of October, with the aspens turning gold on the hillsides and the air carrying the first hint of the coming winter. The ceremony took place on the Mitchell Ranch, with Thomas giving away the bride and Martha sniffling loudly in the front row of hastily arranged chairs. The entire community turned out for the celebration, many of the same people who had been too busy to help during the cattle crisis, now eager to share in the happy occasion. Zara greeted them all with gracious warmth, holding no grudges for past slights. Life's too short for keeping score, she told Owen when he remarked on her forgiveness. Besides, they're our neighbors. We'll need them someday and they'll need us. Their first year of marriage brought challenges, as Owen had predicted. The winter was harsh, with blizzards that tested even the most experienced ranchers. But they weathered it together, combining their herds and their knowledge to ensure both properties thrived. By the following spring, construction had begun on a new house situated on the boundary between the two ranches, symbolically uniting the land as Owen and Zara had united their lives. Thomas Mitchell, though still residing in the original ranch house, was a frequent visitor to the building site, offering suggestions and occasionally overseeing the work when the younger couple was busy with the cattle. It's going to be a fine home, he pronounced one evening as they sat together on stacks of lumber, watching the sunset. Room enough for a family. Zara exchanged a glance with Owen, a secret smile passing between them. "Speaking of family," she began, taking her husband's hand. "We might need to hurry the builders along. The house should be ready by winter." Thomas's eyebrows rose, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Owen's arm slipped around Zara's waist, his face alight with quiet joy. "If you're thinking you'll be a grandfather by Christmas, then yes." The news spread quickly through the small community. Gifts began appearing at both ranches, hand-knitted blankets, tiny clothes, offers of help with the cattle when the time came. The same neighbors who had once been too busy to assist during the crisis now rallied around the expectant parents with genuine warmth. As Zara's pregnancy progressed, Owen took on more of the physical labor, insisting she rest despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of working. "The cattle will still be there after the baby comes," he reminded her when she grew frustrated with her limitations. "And you'll be back to outworking me before I know it." The house was completed just as the first snow dusted the hills in early November. It was everything they had hoped for: spacious, but not ostentatious, with large windows that captured the sweeping views of both properties. Thomas insisted on gifting them with furniture that had belonged to Zara's mother, pieces that had been carefully stored away since her death. "She would have wanted you to have them," he said as they arranged her mother's rocking chair near the fireplace in the main room, "to pass down to your children." The first snow had barely melted when the second arrived, heavier this time, blanketing the land in white silence. Zara, now in her 8th month, stood at the window watching the flakes swirl in the December wind. "Reminds me of the night we met," Owen observed, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her expanded waistline. "Though this storm's considerably more gentle than that one." Zara leaned back against him. "That night, I thought we'd lost everything. I never imagined it would lead to gaining so much." Their son was born on Christmas Eve, arriving with the same decisive determination that characterized his mother. Thomas Mitchell, summoned from his house by a ranch hand sent at Owen's insistence, arrived just in time to hear his grandson's first lusty cries. "He has your lungs," the proud grandfather declared as he held the infant for the first time, "and your mother's chin." They named him Matthew Thomas Armstrong, honoring both Zara's father and the memory of Owen's own father. In the quiet days that followed, as winter held the land in its grip and the new family settled into their routines, Zara often found herself reflecting on how drastically her life had changed in the span of a single year. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked one evening, finding her standing on the porch despite the cold, the baby bundled against her chest. "I was thinking about storms," she replied, her breath visible in the frigid air. "How the worst ones sometimes blow in the best changes." Owen drew her and the baby back into the warmth of the house, closing the door against the winter night. "In that case, I'm grateful for that storm every single day." The years that followed brought more children, twin girls who arrived 18 months after Matthew, followed by another son 3 years later. The combined ranches prospered under Owen and Zara's management, eventually becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Thomas Mitchell lived to see all 4 of his grandchildren grow into their early years, passing peacefully in his sleep when Matthew was 10. He left behind a legacy not just of land and cattle, but of resilience and kindness, qualities his daughter and son-in-law worked to instill in their children. On the anniversary of the storm each year, Owen and Zara made a point of telling their children the story of how they met, of cattle scattered to the winds, of a cowboy who rode through the night to bring back strays, and of how the worst disaster led to the greatest blessing of their lives. "The moral of the story," Owen would always conclude with a wink at his wife, "is that you should always help your neighbors because you never know when you might be helping your future wife." Zara would inevitably roll her eyes at this simplification, though the children delighted in it. Later, when they were alone, she would remind him of the real lesson. "The moral," she would say, curling into his embrace as they sat before the fire in the house they had built together, "is that sometimes you have to weather the storm to find your way home." And Owen, who had once wandered from ranch to ranch with no place to truly call his own, would hold her close and marvel at how one desperate night's ride had led him not just to 50 scattered cattle, but to everything he had never known he was searching for.